Have you ever broken up with someone, but somehow, a piece of that relationship still stayed with you? Not a photograph, not an old sweater, but something alive, breathing, looking at you every single day. For me, that piece was a cat. Actually, to cats. And they had been with us for more than 7 years. This story isn't just about love, or heartbreak, or moving on. It's about two cats, an ex-boyfriend, and a new girlfriend, who just happened to be allergic to the one thing that kept us connected. And that's where it all begins. We had been broken up for over 3 years. On paper, that sounds like enough time to heal, enough time to move on. But the truth is, the past doesn't always stay buried. Back when we were together, we adopted 2 tiny kittens. One black, with piercing green eyes and an adventurous streak, always leaping onto the fridge like it was climbing Mount Everest. The other was golden, soft, and calm, curling up by the window in every patch of sunlight it could find. We used to laugh and call ourselves their parents, joking that if we ever split up, at least we wouldn't end up in court fighting over custody of kids. Just cats. Back then, I thought it was just a silly joke. I never imagined it would become reality. When we finally ended things, there were no screaming matches, no broken plates, no slammed doors, just silence. A heavy silence so sharp, I could hear the scratch of little claws against the sofa. He took the black cat. It always followed him anyway, its eyes locked on him like he was its whole world. I kept the golden one. It chose me, padded behind me wherever I walked, curling against me at night as if whispering, "Don't worry, I'm still here." And that was it. One person, one cat. Fair, clean, simple, or so I thought. But life has a way of twisting what you think is settled. For 3 years, we stayed in touch. We would send pictures of the cats, updates, little stories about their quirks. And in some small way, I believe that even if our love ended, the bond of what we shared the cats kept us connected in something gentle. I believed that, until someone else stepped into the picture. His new girlfriend, and she was allergic to cats. Her name is Z. I never asked what the Z stood for, but somehow it fit her like she was the ending to a sentence I didn't know I had been writing. When he first told me about her, I felt that familiar pinch in my chest, the one you don't admit to anyone. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. More like the quiet sting of knowing the chapter really was closed, and he was already starting a new book. At first, she was just a name in passing, mentioned casually in conversation. Z and I went out for dinner, or Z tried cooking something last night, and I would nod, or type back a quick "that's nice," and keep scrolling through my day. But little by little, she stopped being a name. She became real, a voice on speakerphone when he called, a laugh in the background of a photo. And then she became a problem. Z was allergic to cats. Not the kind of allergy you shake off with a sneeze or two, but the kind that makes your eyes swell and your chest tighten like there's no air left in the room. I could picture her walking into his townhouse 3 stories tall, echoing with space and instantly feeling her body revolt against the fur, the dander, the ghost of 7 years worth of paw prints. And then, the question I hadn't wanted to face landed in my lap. What happens to his cat? The black one. The one that had lived with him all this time, curled up on his bed, stretched out on his couch, watching him with those bright green eyes as if to say, "You're my person." What happens when the person you've chosen chooses someone who can't live with you? He messaged me one night, not a long text, not even dressed up with apologies, just, "Hey, would you be able to take my cat? Z's moving in soon." I stared at my phone, my golden cat asleep against my legs, and felt the room tilt a little. Take his cat? The other half of the pair we had raised together? The one that had chosen him. My apartment was too small, my lease too strict. 1 cat was already bending the rules. 2 would break them, but more than that, it felt like he was placing the weight of his choices into my hands, as if I could fix a life he didn't want to rearrange. As if my world should stretch to make space for his new happiness. And the worst part, a tiny, stubborn part of me wanted to say yes, because that cat wasn't just his. It was ours. I sat there that night with my phone in my hand, staring at the message over and over. My golden cat stretched out lazily beside me, purring as if the world was perfectly safe. And yet, I felt the exact opposite. I typed out a dozen responses, each one colder than the last, and deleted them all. What was I supposed to say? Sure, I'll rearrange my entire life for you and your new girlfriend? Or maybe no, sorry, I can't save the cat you've raised for 7 years. Good luck dropping it at a shelter. Neither answer felt right, and both felt like a trap. In the end, I wrote back something simple. I can't. My apartment doesn't allow cats. But here's a list of options: friends who foster, local rescues, even allergy shots. There are solutions if you try. I thought it was reasonable, compassionate even. I wasn't slamming the door, I was opening windows, but his reply came fast, sharp. Z tried allergy shots. They didn't work. I stared at that line, my jaw tightening. Didn't work. Or she didn't want them to. Against my better judgment, I typed back, what, is she anti-vaccine or something? It was supposed to be a joke, a dry, off-handed attempt to cut through the tension. But even as I pressed send, I knew it wasn't going to land that way. The next day, I woke up to a flood of messages. His words weren't kind. He accused me of mocking her, of being cruel, of crossing a line that wasn't mine to cross. My heart pounded as I scrolled through them, each one cutting deeper. I wanted to scream back, you pulled me into this. You asked me to carry your problem. But instead, I sat in silence, my golden cat's head resting against my arm, purring like a heartbeat I could barely hear. And beneath all the noise of his anger, all I could think was this: that black cat has been his shadow for more than 7 years. It knows his footsteps, his voice, the shape of his life. And if he abandoned it now, at 11 years old, it might never find another home. It would sit in a shelter, confused, waiting for him to come back. And he never would. I couldn't imagine that kind of betrayal. Not after everything we'd promised those kittens when we first brought them home. Not after years of calling ourselves a family. And yet here we were. Him, choosing love. Me, choosing loyalty. And 2 cats caught in the middle, paying the price for choices they never made. The argument spilled over like water from a glass tipped too far. His messages kept coming, each one sharper than the last. Stay out of my relationship. You don't get to judge how I handle this. And yet, wasn't he the one who dragged me back into it? Wasn't he the one who asked me to take responsibility for the cat, the life we had raised together, because it was suddenly inconvenient for him? I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, my chest tight with words. I couldn't decide whether to release or swallow. In the background, the city buzzed outside my apartment window. Cars passing, people living their lives. And I was here, stuck between past and present, between anger and grief. I wanted to scream at him, you can't just trade loyalty for romance. You don't get to choose love and call it sacrifice when the one who suffers can't even speak for himself. But I knew if I said it, it would bounce off him like rain on stone. He didn't want to hear the truth. He wanted absolution. So instead, I whispered it to the only creature who might understand. My golden cat lifted its head, blinking slow, patient eyes at me. I stroked the fur between its ears, my throat aching. What's going to happen to him? I asked softly, though neither of us said the black cat's name. Doesn't he deserve better than this? The silence that followed was heavier than any reply my ex could have sent. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about cats. It wasn't just about allergies or apartments or relationships. It was about the weight of responsibility, the way we choose to honor the bonds we've built or abandon them when they become inconvenient. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the last time I'd hear from him. This wasn't the end of the fight. This was just the first crack in something much larger. A fracture spreading through the fragile balance of our past and his present. As I sat there in the dim light of my apartment, with my cat curled against me and my phone still buzzing on the table, I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. And I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, maybe me, maybe him, maybe the cats themselves, was about to lose far more than we ever expected. Breakups don't always happen in a single moment. They're not a slammed door or a shouted word frozen in time. Sometimes they're slow. A gradual unraveling of all the little stitches you thought would hold forever. That's what ours was like. We'd been together for nearly 7 years. 7 years of dinners and fights and inside jokes, of moving boxes into new apartments, of holiday visits with families that eventually stopped asking when we'd make it official. 7 years where I thought, this is it. This is the person I'll grow old with. And woven into that time, like golden thread through fabric, were the cats. They weren't just pets. They were witnesses. Witnesses to the late-night arguments we whispered so neighbors wouldn't hear. Witnesses to the mornings we cooked pancakes and laughed until the syrup burned. Witnesses to the nights we lay on the couch, watching movies we'd both seen 100 times, their bodies draped across us like warm blankets. When the end finally came, it wasn't because of betrayal. Not the kind people usually mean anyway. It wasn't another person. It wasn't a single fight. It was the silence. That unbearable, growing silence between two people who no longer reached for each other first. So when we split, we divided everything the way people do. Furniture, dishes, books. But when it came to the cats, the decision wasn't logical, it was emotional. One loved him, one loved me. And so we split them, 2 at a time. It felt almost merciful, like proof that we could still do this with kindness. Proof that even though we failed as partners, we hadn't failed as human beings. But now, years later, I realized how naive that was. Because sometimes kindness at the moment is just a debt you're leaving for the future. And the bill always comes due. When Z appeared, it wasn't the first time he had dated someone new. I'd known about others, but they were always temporary, surface level, people who passed through like chapters you skim quickly. Z was different. She wasn't a chapter. She was the book he wanted to write. Now, I knew because she started showing up in the little details. The way he spoke, the things he cared about. Suddenly, he wasn't just him anymore, he was him and Z, and that's when the cats stopped being just cats. They became obstacles. I imagined her stepping into that townhouse for the first time, her eyes watering, her throat closing, the allergic reaction crashing over her like a wave. Did she look at the black cat with fear? With resentment? Did she flinch when it rubbed against her leg, seeking the only home it had ever known? I don't blame her. Not really. Allergies aren't a choice. But I couldn't shake the bitterness in my chest, the thought that she had become the reason he was even considering giving up a living creature who trusted him completely. And here's the cruel irony. If she had been allergic to flowers, or peanuts, or dust, he would have adjusted his life around her. But because it was his cat, the solution wasn't adaptation. It was abandonment, and that made me wonder, if she can't live with the past he's carried for 7 years, how will she handle the parts of him she hasn't seen yet? The scars, the regrets, the ghosts. The night he asked me to take the cat, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that black cat sitting in a cage at a shelter, eyes wide, ears pinned back, waiting for footsteps that never came. 11 years old, too old to be anyone's first choice. Too loyal to understand betrayal. I thought about the promises we made the day we adopted them. We didn't say it out loud, but we felt it. That silent vow, you are ours, and we are yours, for as long as you need us. Pets don't understand breakups. They don't understand allergies. They understand love. Food in the bowl, a warm lap, a familiar voice calling their name. That's it. That's everything. And when we, as humans, fail them, they don't get closure. They just wait. That's what gnawed at me. Not just the thought of the cat's future, but the realization that he, the man I once loved, could let go so easily. As if loyalty was negotiable. As if promises expired when they became inconvenient. It made me question things I hadn't dared before. Was this the man I had once planned to spend my life with? Was this the person I thought I knew so deeply? If he could abandon the creature who trusted him most, what would he have done to me eventually? Was this the ending I had avoided without knowing it? In the days after our argument, I carried 2 weights inside me. One was guilt. The other was anger. Guilt, because part of me wondered if I should have just said yes. Should I have bent the rules of my lease, risked everything, and taken in that cat? Wouldn't it have been better than letting him suffer? Maybe I was selfish for putting my comfort above his survival, but then anger would surge, hot and bitter. Why was this my burden? Why should I sacrifice, when the responsibility was his from the very beginning? Why was I the one losing sleep, pacing my small apartment, while he lived in a 3-story house and claimed there was no choice? And through all of it, my golden cat stayed beside me, watching me, quiet, present, a reminder that loyalty isn't complicated. It isn't negotiable. It just is. That's when I realized, this story wasn't finished. He and I weren't finished. The cats had bound us together once, and now, they were pulling us back into each other's lives in ways neither of us wanted. And as much as I wished I could entangle myself, I knew deep down that the real conflict, the real reckoning was still coming, because love ends, friendships fade, but promises to those who can't speak for themselves, they echo. They demand to be answered, and soon, one of us would have to answer. It didn't take long. Just a few days after our fight, another message appeared on my phone. Short, nervous, almost rehearsed. I think I'm going to rehome him. Unless, maybe you've changed your mind? I sat there, staring at the words. Changed my mind? As if this were a matter of preference, like choosing what to eat for dinner. As if I could just shrug and say, sure, why not? Bring me the life you don't want anymore. The anger came first. It always did. I wanted to write back. He's not a piece of furniture. He's not an old couch you give away because your new girlfriend doesn't like the color. But then came the guilt, soft and heavy, pressing down on me. Because part of me wanted to drive over to his house right then, scoop up that black cat, and never let him go. To prove to the world and maybe to myself that at least one of us still remembered the promises we made. Instead, I wrote nothing. Silence. A silence so loud it filled the room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to my golden cat's steady purr, and memories came flooding back. The first night we brought the kittens home. How they hid under the couch, tiny and trembling, their eyes wide as they peered out at us. We had crouched on the floor for hours, coaxing them out with soft voices and bits of food. When the black one finally climbed into his lap, it felt like fate had chosen for us. I remembered how we laughed when they knocked over a lamp, how we groaned when they clawed the curtains, how we whispered to each other, half serious, "There are babies." Those memories didn't fade when we broke up. They lived in me, in him, in the cats themselves. And now, it felt like he wanted to erase all of it. Trade 7 years of loyalty for a few months of convenience, and that's when the fear crept in. If he could forget so easily, maybe I had meant less to him than I thought. Maybe the silence that ended us wasn't just distance, it was indifference. Eventually, I gave in. I called him. My voice shook, but I tried to sound calm. Listen, I said, you can't just get rid of him. He's 11 years old. Do you know what happens to cats that age in shelters? They don't get adopted. They sit, they wait. And then, I swallowed hard. They die. On the other end, silence. Then his voice, low and defensive. You think I don't know that? Then why are you even considering it? I snapped. Because she sneezes? Because her eyes water? You've had him longer than you've had her. That's not fair, he shot back. You don't understand what it's like. I'm trying to build a life with her. She can't breathe in my house, and he won't breathe in a shelter, I said, my voice breaking. The line went quiet. For a moment, I thought he might really hear me. But then, his voice turned cold. This isn't your business anymore. Stay out of it. I wanted to scream. You made it my business the moment you asked me to fix it for you. But the words never made it out. After the call, I sat in the dark for a long time. My chest ached, my throat burned. But the worst part wasn't the fight. It was the truth hiding beneath it. He had chosen. And it wasn't the cat. I realized then that this wasn't just about loyalty or promises. It was about the way people rewrite themselves when new love enters their lives. The way they shed the parts that don't fit the story they want to tell. I had seen it happen before, in smaller ways. Friends who dropped hobbies because their partners didn't share them. People who stopped listening to certain music, stopped eating certain foods, stopped being certain versions of themselves all for love. But this was different. This was a living creature, a life. And I couldn't stop thinking, if she asked him to, would he erase every part of his past, including me? I curled up with my golden cat that night, pressing my face into its fur. The steady rumble of its purr was the only thing grounding me. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this wasn't the end, because love might make people forget. But animals don't forget. They wait, they trust, they believe. And when we betray that belief, it lingers forever like a crack in glass that never quite disappears. I didn't realize how much pressure had been building until it finally snapped. After that last conversation with my ex, I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at my cat curled up at the end of the bed. The room felt smaller than ever, not because of the walls closing in, but because of the weight of his words still hanging over me. He had accused me of being disrespectful, of mocking his girlfriend, of stepping into a place I didn't belong. And maybe to him, that was true, but to me, it felt like I was the only one still grounded in reality. These cats weren't just accessories you could return when they no longer fit your lifestyle. They were living beings who had loved us, relied on us, been through every season of our lives. And suddenly, their whole world was about to be turned upside down because someone couldn't handle a runny nose and itchy eyes. I sat there shaking, wondering, Was I really wrong for saying what I said? Or was I finally just saying out loud what needed to be said? It's impossible to explain to someone outside of it just how deep this history runs. These weren't just pets we'd stumbled into. We'd adopted them when we were still building a life together. Back when we thought forever was possible. When we moved into that first little place with second-hand furniture and dreams that were bigger than our paychecks, those cats became part of that family we were trying to create. They sat with me when I cried after losing my job. They rubbed against his legs when he came home late and exhausted. They were there through every fight, every reconciliation, every quiet Sunday morning. And now, years later, even though we'd split, even though we'd built separate lives, they were still tethered to us. How do you walk away from that? How do you tell a creature who doesn't understand words that you're giving them up because your new girlfriend sneezes? I thought about how we used to laugh when the cats chased each other down the hallway, how they would curl up between us on cold nights. That history isn't something you just erase. It lives in you. It claws at your conscience when you try to ignore it, but my ex didn't see it that way anymore. To him, this was about convenience, about keeping his girlfriend happy, about making his life smoother. And the clash between us came down to values, his desire to preserve his relationship at all costs, and my refusal to let these animals be treated like disposable furniture. We argued through texts, the coldest battlefield of all. No tone of voice, no nuance, just blunt words, sometimes cruel, sometimes defensive, always leaving too much unsaid. He accused me of crossing boundaries. I accused him of abandoning his responsibilities. He said I was trying to sabotage his relationship. I said he was sacrificing loyalty for comfort. And through it all, I could feel the thread between us, the one that had survived our breakup, that fragile attempt at friendship beginning to snap. Maybe this was always inevitable. Maybe you can't stay friends with someone you once loved, not when life throws these impossible choices at you. But I wasn't just fighting for the friendship. I was fighting for two lives who couldn't fight for themselves, and maybe that's what scared me most, realizing how much this fight wasn't just about the cats or his girlfriend. It was about me, about how I still carry the weight of every promise we made, even when they're broken. About how I can't stand watching someone I once trusted turn into a stranger who makes choices I don't recognize. It made me look at myself in the mirror and ask, why do I still care? Why am I still holding on to this moral high ground when it only causes me pain? Maybe part of it is pride. Maybe part of it is love, not for him, but for what we built, for what those cats represent. They're proof that some things in our past were real, tangible, and good. To let them go so carelessly would be like erasing those years altogether. And I couldn't allow that. So I stood my ground, even as the friendship burned to ashes. Even as he told me to stay out of his life. Even as I realized I'd probably never see his cat again. The mirror didn't give me peace, but it gave me clarity. Sometimes doing the right thing means losing people. Sometimes protecting what you love means being painted as the villain. And maybe that's okay. When the text stopped, the silence felt heavier than the words ever did. For the first time in over 3 years, my phone wasn't lighting up with his name. No casual check-ins. No updates about the cats. No awkward "hope you're doing okay" messages. Just nothing. The silence was deafening. And in that quiet, I realized how much space he'd still been taking up in my life. Even though we'd broken up, even though I'd tried to move on, his presence lingered in the corners of my day like dust you don't see until sunlight hits it. And now, without him, it was like I was standing in a room that had suddenly been emptied of furniture, bare, echoing, unfamiliar. I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, I felt grief. Not for the relationship, not even for the friendship that had just gone up in flames, but for the cats. For the one that wasn't with me, for the one who might never curl up in my lap again. That grief was sharper than I expected. It cut deeper than I was prepared for. My own cat, the one who chose me after the breakup, became my anchor. He seemed to sense the shift, curling against me every night, following me from room to room as if he knew I needed the company more than ever. In those moments, I felt both gratitude and guilt. Gratitude that I had him, that he was healthy, that his soft purring could drown out the doubts echoing in my head. And guilt because I knew his brother, his companion of nearly a decade, was still across town, caught in a house where his future felt uncertain. I thought about their bond, how they used to groom each other, how they'd chase shadows across the living room, how, even when we fought, the cats always stuck together. And I wondered, Did he miss his brother? Did he wonder why the world had split them apart? That thought alone was enough to make my chest tighten. Because as much as I wanted to protect him, I couldn't protect the bond they once had. That was the price of our breakup. And maybe that was the saddest truth of all. The weeks passed. Life moved forward, as it always does, but the weight of the situation lingered like a shadow at my heels. I started to realize something important. We don't get to choose what people do with the promises they once made. We only get to choose what we do with the pieces left behind. My ex had chosen his path. He'd chosen convenience, chosen love, chosen his girlfriend over loyalty to an animal that had been by his side for years. That was his choice to carry, and maybe someday, he'd regret it. But me, I chose differently. I chose to carry the responsibility, even when it wasn't mine anymore. I chose to speak up, even when it cost me the last scraps of our friendship. I chose to fight for something voiceless and vulnerable. And as much as it hurt, as much as it felt like loss, it also gave me something I didn't expect: clarity about who I am. I am someone who refuses to let love, any kind of love, be disposable. That's the peace I carry. That's the truth I live with. Eventually, I realized I had to let the story end. Not the story of the cats, they'll live on, in my care, in his care, wherever life takes them. But the story of us, me and him. The illusion that we could stay friends. The hope that the bond we once had could be reshaped into something clean and simple. That was gone. And letting it go was both heartbreaking and freeing. Because sometimes endings aren't tidy. Sometimes they're jagged, messy, unfair. But they're still endings. And endings make room for beginnings. When I finally let myself accept that, I felt lighter. I still think about his cat. I still wonder if he's okay. But I don't reach out anymore. I don't wait for updates. I don't hold my breath for apologies. I just live. Me and my cat. Our quiet apartment. Our little life. And maybe, in the end, that's enough. Because some stories aren't meant to last forever. Some stories are just meant to teach you who you are. And this one? It taught me that love, real love, the kind that endures, isn't about convenience. It's about commitment. And I refuse to forget that. Months passed. Life settled into a rhythm that was both ordinary and sacred. My golden cat had grown older, his fur a little duller, his purr a little slower, but still comforting in ways only a living heartbeat can be. I found myself watching him as he slept in the sunlight, marveling at how something so small could hold so much meaning. And in those quiet moments, I realized how much of myself I had reclaimed. The anger, the grief, the sleepless nights, they had all shaped me, but they no longer defined me. The story with my ex and the black cat was no longer a shadow hanging over my days. It had become a lesson, a mirror, a reminder that life asks us to carry the weight we choose, and sometimes to release the weight we cannot bear. I thought about him occasionally, of course. About how easy it must have been for him to step into a new life, to redefine himself, to make choices I couldn't influence. And slowly, I realized I wasn't angry anymore, not really. I was understanding, not excusing, not forgiving, not forgetting, understanding. People are fallible. They make decisions based on what feels urgent or comfortable, not always on what is right. And sometimes that means breaking bonds we once swore to honor. My ex had done what he thought he needed to do, just as I had done what I thought I needed to do. And the cats? They had survived. They had loved. They had endured. That in itself was enough. With the past acknowledged, I could finally move forward. I arranged my apartment, small as it was, to make space for the life I wanted, not for someone else, not for anyone who demanded compromise, but for me and the cat who had chosen me. I took long walks. I laughed more freely. I allowed myself to imagine a future unshadowed by old relationships. And yet, I never forgot the lessons. Loyalty is fragile. Love is not always reciprocal. Life will demand hard choices. But living with integrity, honoring the promises you make even when they're inconvenient, is a kind of victory all its own. Sometimes, the hardest stories are the ones without a perfect ending. This was one of those stories. No one got everything they wanted. No one walked away untouched. But in the quiet aftermath, I discovered something precious: resilience, clarity, and a bond that could not be broken by circumstance. My golden cat sleeps at my feet as I type this, and I think about the black cat, wherever he is, and I hope he knows he was loved. I hope he knows he mattered. And I hope, most of all, that I can carry this lesson forward. Love is not about convenience. It is about responsibility. It is about being present for those who cannot speak for themselves. And sometimes, being human means choosing the hard, messy path of integrity, because that is the path that allows us to wake up each morning, look in the mirror, and finally, feel whole.